Good evening, and for another session of the Saveetha Architecture Talk Series. We're glad to have architect Tahaer Zoyab with us today and look forward to his talk. Thank you, Tahaer, for accepting to participate in our forum. It has over 50 architects. Yeah, it has over 50 architects from around the world who are participating. So it's just unfolding on. So in a week, we have 2 or 3 conversations of this kind. And more often than not, we have participants from Nepal, then Sri Lanka, South Africa. So it's kind of a mix. And then these talks are also going to be archived for access across these schools. So they're open access, open source, people can access it. So that's the whole idea. But it's also an idea that in the evening, many of the students suggested if we have these talks, when they're in the evening, just sitting back outside of the class forum, they're just absorbing and listening. So we thought, let's do it. Then the idea grew on, why not we open it up to whoever's interested. It's primarily for the school, but we thought, let's open it up to whoever's interested. And this will then evolve into a kind of a forum that will be anchored around our college, where almost 25 schools from Southeast Asia, now Nepal, 4 schools, Bangladesh, then Sapienza, Rome, Plymouth. So we've all kind of agreed that that will become a kind of a hub center. And as lockdown unfolds, they're all coming down and we'll evolve it in real time. So at that time, these talks will become useful because they'll be playing all the time, almost like a festival. And so we're building up for that also. But we thought instead of doing separate recordings and videos, the Zoom format enables us to have this conversation. So we look forward to your talk. I would thank you again. I'll request architect Priyanka, who's curating this, to introduce Tahaer Zoyab today. And then after the conversation, we open it up for a small dialogue on what you said, your provocations. And, yeah. So thank you very much, Tahaer. Yeah. Thank you. Priyanka, would you?
Thank you, sir. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I take immense pleasure in introducing our speaker for today, Tahaer Zoyab, an architect, urban designer, and co-founder of TripleO. He did his bachelor's at the School of Architecture and Planning, Anna University, Chennai. His experience spans across India, including international competitions across Europe, USA, and Asia. His experiences at Architecture Paradigm, CNT, and Wall B Architects cemented his interest in the various facets of space design. He added to that diversity by pursuing a master's in urban design at Columbia University, having worked as an architect, a tour guide, site worker in New York City, gave him a set palette of skills to start work on our own. So what is on our own? Triple O, or on our own as we know it, is a symbolization of things done on our own. A space which allows for input collaboration, ideation, and creation across multiple design platforms, viewed through various lenses. The design philosophy of the studio focuses on human-centric design and design that makes an impact, in the belief that massive change can be brought about through design, a conviction in design for purpose and not by scale or cost. Our studio breaks free from the typical definitions of one by acting as a playground for creative knowledge to coalesce, thus enhancing the concept of learning, sharing, and co-working together. He also takes pride in sharing his knowledge through lectures and collaborative discussions with keen minds at various design schools. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box on your control panel and we'll bring them up for questions at the end. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Architect Tahaer.
Thank you. Thank you all. It was a lovely introduction. Thanks for that. And I look forward to this presentation and I would love to have a conversation post that. I'm going to quickly share my screen and do let me know if you can see what's being shared. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Thanks. Okay. All right. So as I said a little earlier, I'm hoping through a few projects that I've selected to briefly take all of you along the journey that's been our studio. And I'm going to start off with this project. This is one of our first projects, and it's a public toilet. And one of the reasons I love to start any discourse with this particular project is because I think this particular project was a window and a gateway into us understanding how working in the public realm is all about. We got a glimpse into the government, into the various systems that one has to negotiate to be able to do any kind of work in the public domain. And what was really exciting for us is, firstly, this project came very informally through somebody who had tagged us on Facebook. One thing led to another, and before you know it, I'm sitting outside an IAS officer's room and trying to make a pitch for a public toilet. In college, we all may have attempted a project such as this, which is probably just a 1-week exercise. This particular project, the reason it's also close to my heart is this took a whole 2 years to realize. And one of the things that I enjoyed a lot during this process was the discourse with the different officers and the team that was built around this project. So as part of this project, we had us as the architects who were greatly in charge of the layout and the planning of it all. We had an industrial designer who was focused on the detailing of the modules of this particular toilet. We had a visualizer and a visualization company. We were working with a media company that was creating marketing content for it. And the IAS officer himself was an industrial designer by education, which was great because every time we went to present, it felt like going in for a design jury. But having said that, what was lovely was to really get a varied and diverse points of view during such discourses. And that's when I understood that, design is, and it's like this vast playground, and there is just so many things that can influence and inspire and, create wonderful architecture. And we're very, very proud of this particular project that was done almost a decade or so ago. And after which we spent a lot of time, doing competitions, because during the early days of our practice, of course, we didn't have too much work. We spent a lot of our free time mostly just exploring ideas, exploring concepts, and we kept working on a competition project. Until date, we are constantly ensuring that no matter how busy we get with other work that is our bread and butter, maybe we are constantly working on ideas, developing concepts, researching and exploring a little bit. This particular competition was in Manila in the Philippines, and this competitions on a global scale, what they allow you to do is immerse yourself into a contextual scenario that you're extremely alien to. And back then, this particular competition was, I think, about 8 years ago. And back then, Google Street Map was still new in some countries. And it was so exciting for us to be able to just drag this little person onto a road and get some sense of what the immediate environment is like. And after a point, doing this continuously with multiple competitions, we almost became like virtual travelers every time we did these types of competitions. And that is another reason why I enjoyed this so much, because I mean, to me, to travel is to live, and truly, this, in a sense, was a glimpse into that. And I also felt like our understanding of different contexts evolved so greatly that it felt like a very rewarding experience at the end of it. And all of this competition as well was a collaboration with a few students that were interested in exploring bamboo as a material, interested in housing itself, which is what this project is about. This particular project, I'm not really talking about its architecture too much, but I'll try and summarize the larger intent, which was to design a housing for the university in Manila, and this is for the students and faculty. And the idea is that it needed to be designed effectively to protect against the elements, which is, and this area is prone to a lot of flooding. So one of the things that we did from an architectural perspective was try to activate the terrace plane completely. And we used bamboos in very interesting ways to kind of generate the entire shell. We used bamboo reinforced concrete for a lot of it. And some of the interior spaces had just bamboo screens that separated one kitchen space from another, such that there was a sense of community as a result. And of course, these are some slides that just talk about how we envision the terrace, for instance, and some diagrams on the right which suggest what we've done to kind of negotiate the different weather conditions and the wind and the rains and so on, and working with linkages to kind of create the larger footprint of what we had designed. And these sectional elevations kind of tell you the detailing that we had in mind for this entire project. So global competitions on a global scale was something that always kept us going, and even till today, it's something that we do very, very regularly. But coming to the local, this is something that, of course, interests us a lot more, because we are very, very eager to kind of do something meaningful in our local context. And this particular competition was actually in Gurugram or Gurgaon, and Gurgaon, as we know, is it's basically a rural settlement that overnight urbanized and exploded almost. And this got us really interested in thinking about sustainability, in thinking about sustainable ecosystems, and what we could do to kind of marry that with architecture. And this particular project allowed for us to kind of think along those lines, where it was to design an IT park where several of the buildings were already pre-designed. And this central space that you're seeing in this visualization is a combination of both workspaces as well as terraces that can act as possible areas where food could grow, where urban farming could basically happen. So we've always been very interested in the idea of thinking about sustainable ecosystems from multiple lenses. And in this case, it was the lens of thinking of, food and nature, and how that could integrate into a building that looks extremely manicured in a sense. And then coming from this to the hyper local, which is of course our own immediate context. This was another competition, which was a call to design a better street in our context, which is the context of India in this case. The diagram on the left clearly shows the disparity between the infrastructure that's available and the priority that's really given to the different densities that you see on the street. So what I'm trying to suggest with this particular diagram is that there are a significant number of people mostly using non-motorized means of transit in our context, but the infrastructure, unfortunately, is predominantly designed to cater to the motorized means of transit. And to some extent, we were looking to bring equity to the street, and we feel this is important for multivarious reasons. For instance, the act of basically just walking rather than driving, hypothetically, it allows you to experience so much more in that brief point in time. And the reason we called the shift focus is because while we were also doing urban projects, and while we continue to do urban projects actively with working with governments and so on, we've noticed that there is a need to shift the focus and bring, and only then will there truly be that idea of equity. So in this case, being a competition project, again, every time there's a competition, we constantly are trying something new, not just in terms of maybe an idea that we're exploring, but also in terms of presentation, also in terms of, just developing different tools and techniques with which we work. So in this case, there are traces of, watercolor, there's a little bit of rendering that's happening, there's a little bit of uh, Photoshop work and so on. And we played around with bamboo in this case as an experiment to see how one could design a lot of the street elements, such as your bus stops, etc., using bamboo as a predominant element on the street, but also keeping the ideas very simple, like you're seeing on your right, which is the section on top kind of shows you what would be maybe an ideal street. And the section in the middle is a representation of truly how it is sometimes used in our context. And the one below basically shows you the same ideal section, but the one way in which we are saying that it can work is as simple as working on lighting more effectively. So these are different powerful arguments that we made in this particular competition project through different diagram sketches and representations, and we ended up winning this particular competition. I think we came second, if I'm not wrong. So these things constantly keep us going, and this idea of engaging with the public and engaging with the context has always been something that's been close to our studio's heart. And my father, who's also an architect, is originally from this quaint little town called Sitpur in Gujarat, and to be honest, that cemented my interest in not just architecture but heritage to a great extent. And recently, about say 5 to 6 years ago, I was called by a friend who's the editor of the Mylapore Times to host a walk in Mylapore and to talk about the architecture of Mylapore, especially the residential architecture of Mylapore. So we made this a project. We called this Houses of Mylapore. There was a lot of intense weeks of mapping that was happening, and we identified the different styles that were seen there, and it truly blew my mind. It really opened my mind. I thought, as somebody who actually grew up in Santhom, I was fairly familiar with Mylapore, but little did I realize that honestly, as architects, there's a lot more that we can be doing to engage with our immediate context than I think at least I do on a personal level. And this was an eye-opener for us, and this exercise was a beautiful one. And the walk went really well. There were 114 people that came for this particular walk that I conducted. And since this happened and this went well, and Priyanka briefly touched upon this during her introduction, which is that I had a little bit of experience being a tour guide. And I think that came in handy greatly in the way in which this project is now manifested. And few months later, we did another walk, and the real shocking thing for us was that in many of the places that we had stopped earlier in the earlier walk, the houses weren't even there anymore. They didn't exist. And this is in a matter of a few months. This is not a few years. That really shook us quite a bit. And we then understood and realized that there is definitely so much of information here, there's a wealth of knowledge here that needs to be shared, that needs to be spoken about, that needs to be, this needs to be spread. So ever since then, we do this on an annual level in Mylapore through the festival. But besides that, this initiative planted the seeds of what we started later called Madras Inherited, because we wanted to scale this exercise through the city. And now, as Madras Inherited, we do more than 13 plus heritage walks in different parts of of our city, all of which have such fascinating stories. And to be honest, this wouldn't have even happened if I had not got this call to conduct this little heritage walk very randomly, many years ago. So from an engagement perspective, this is something that really, fuels us on a daily basis. Every day is a new day at Madras Inherited. Our team is probably on the other side of this wall, probably working on our next walk, which is coming soon. I'll tell you all about it later. Those of you who are on social media, please look us up at Madras Inherited. And what all of these projects that I showed you earlier, starting with the number toilet and some of these things taught us is how to negotiate what we do, how to kind of understand how to make it sustainable. So having spent this many years doing public projects, 10 plus years to be honest, uh, we have now understood what works in our context. And in my opinion, I think ideas that are centric towards tactile urbanism, smaller urban interventions, work a lot better than these mega projects or these grand master plans that are attempting to kind of change the whole thing. Because having gotten a glimpse into the system, we understood how problematic the system itself is and how everything kind of operates in silos. And I think for us as a studio, I think that itself gave us cues about how being able to do many things under one umbrella can be a very beautiful thing, can be a very healthy thing, and can really open your eyes. And as somebody, I'm a very curious person, and so for me, currently we have TripleOPixel, which is our professional photography wing, where we work with other architects, other designers, and the experience is so rewarding because you really get to see some amazing work, and you really get to understand how different people think about the same things so differently. And it's a beautiful experience, and I think all of us grow as a result of that. So this particular project that you're seeing in front of you is a small intervention in Besanagar in South Chennai. If any of you are familiar with this area, you may know the Theosophical Society, and there's a little uh, chamfer along the compound wall that's created this little bit of a negative antisocial space, which is used for all sorts of things like open defecation and so on. And this is where the marriage between what we do at Madras Inherited and TripleOStudio as as the urban design side of it come together, because we are now working on a campaign across the city to showcase and celebrate and highlight the different heritage that we have in our city, not just built heritage, but ecological heritage, commemorative heritage, and natural heritage, of course. So this particular project was a celebration of the Bougainvillea. So this is why I mentioned Bougainvillea in that tone, is this is where again negotiation comes in. Bougainvillea is not a native species, and it's in fact brought by the British to our context. And these learnings came to us, as and when we started to try to make this project happen. We had to deal with the government, we had to deal with local stakeholders who are by far the most important people there. And we've got so much learning. So now we're having made this pitch and having understood quite a bit, we've tweaked our design a little bit more to make it slightly more responsive to the local itself. But the signage itself, the signage project, the heritage aspect of it is something that we are scaling up all over the city. So this is an example of a formula, in my opinion, that I think works, where you can look at urban design in our context and look at the small wins and look at how that has the capacity to scale. And this is something that we are actively doing. While I am an urban designer by qualification, my heart also lies in designing the smallest of things that are flexible, things that are modular. And this particular project, again, this was a competition project, but I think this way of thinking, which is also, in my opinion, under the broader, say, umbrella of thinking sustainably, I think is important. For instance, this particular project, as the word suggests, allows the house itself to be reconfigured, allows a home to be reconfigured. And how we did that was basically come up with a toolkit. So this particular view, for instance, I'll go back. This is the same view, which shows how it would be if it was only a ground structure, and what would happen if that same space becomes a G+1 or a double height space. And in this case, we've actually removed one part of the roof to make it like a skylight. And this, in a sense, this sheet that you're seeing in front of you is a representation or a toolkit that showcases the sequencing of how this could possibly happen. And these are a few more details to show how it works. So again, we were exploring materials. This is aircrete, which is a very lightweight concrete block. And then we came up with a detail that we jokingly called the chicken tikka detail in our studio. It's basically a reinforcement rod that runs all the way through, and then you have an Allen key that turns it to basically keep the coursework in place. Again, talking about flexibility, this shows the same thing in a different context altogether. This was the design of the Guggenheim Museum in Helsinki, which was one of the largest competition projects I think ever floated. And what was lovely about this is we kept asking ourselves, how do we start? How do we start thinking about the museum as a typology? We were only familiar with maybe some of the local examples like the one we have in Igmore in Chennai, but I've been fortunate to travel a little bit and I've seen a few other museums. And one of the things that I felt would be very exciting as an idea would be to think of the museum as a dynamic building and think of basically the art within the museum that could basically go to the city, become something, and then come back into the building and constantly ensure that the building is revitalized and re-energized very, very regularly. And I hope my next slide will represent that. So we had, of course, a fixed built shell, and then we've got this lattice-like structure that allow for containers to go in. And Helsinki has a huge port with a lot of these containers that are available. And our idea was very simple, that these containers would go to different parts of the city. They would be worked in, on, around by different artists, and they would come back and be inserted into this building. So what you would have at the end of it is a building that's constantly in flux, it's constantly changing, but at the same time, as a result of that act, is constantly influencing or motivating people to kind of come into the space and see what else they have on offer. So these ways of thinking for us has always been very, very exciting as a studio as well. And slowly we were able to, these are a few more visuals. This is one of the interior spaces that we had. And over time, we've been able to scale up a little bit and been able to, join hands with big wigs in the industry to be able to do a lot more in terms of just the impact of work. So this is a riverfront development in Shimoga, and it's always fascinating to be immersed into another context, like I said earlier. Unlike other places that have riverfront development proposals, in the case of Shimoga, the government had already, well, without too much research, gone ahead and built a gigantic retaining wall along the holy river of the Brahmaputra, and kind of not really paid any attention to the sensitive historic context that surrounded the entire area and runs basically along the river, like the ghats that basically lead to the waterfront and so on. And so we had an interesting set of negotiations to have, and the pictures on top show you exactly what I'm talking about. And this being a large span, about 4 kilometers in total, we split up the entire exercise of designing it into different zones based on the neighborhoods that they responded to and the character of those neighborhoods. For example, there were some neighborhoods that were predominantly filled with, they had a lot of religious buildings. They were very, very active through the day. And then there were some which were very, very quiet residential pockets. So we wanted to ensure that the waterfront in those spaces responded appropriately to these different areas and to the different parts of the city. And from the client's perspective, they were looking at this as being an anchor program that brings in visitors from all over Karnataka, from Bangalore especially is something that they had in mind. So that explains a lot of parking requirements and so on. But all in all, for us, it was a huge privilege to be part of a project like this, because we would never tick the box of being able to compete for such projects. But this is again why I harp about collaboration as being the best way forward. These are a few more visuals from there, a few details of some of the urban furniture, the tree pits, the seating areas, handrails, so on. I'm not going to talk too much about the design there. Um, After the floods that happened in Chennai in 15, one of the things that we did was we started to work a lot with NGOs, because what ended up happening post floods was that a lot of NGOs that were doing some phenomenal work like Bhumika here received a lot of funding that was it was overwhelming, the funding that was received, and the only way to do justice to the kind of donations that were coming in was to actually put that money into rebuilding, rehabilitating, and kind of working on infrastructure in that sense. So we got to be part of some really, really special low-cost housing projects. We got to design, and there also we understood how to get away with a few things. For instance, a lot of people that didn't really own land, we had to ensure that the structure was temporary in nature, and those who had a patta or a parcel of land, they were given housing that was a little bit more permanent, that had proper footing and was not just resting on a plinth beam, for example. And we explored a lot of concepts as far as low cost housing is concerned. We explored concepts using panels, we explored a concept using GFRC, we explored different kind of structural systems, and so on. And this particular housing module that you're seeing in front of you, the 3x3, 3x2, and 2x3 respectively, by far was one of the most, say, amazing things to kind of see unravel in some of these sites, because a lot of these sites were not in the heart of the city at all. They were very remote. They were in the boondocks. They were in places like Melkanampete and Manamadi and so on. And this design is very simple in the sense it focuses on 2 to 3 things to ensure that the two corners are open spaces or semi-open spaces, such that when they iterate or when they replicate, they form larger pockets of open spaces. So the logic is very, very simple. And this slide, I hope, demonstrates how it works. So if you can see my mouse, you've got a large utility refuge of sorts. And for us, these are extremely, extremely important, because women's safety is such a challenge when it comes to scenarios such as this, and so creating those larger refuges, creating those verandas or thinnais in front that would allow and activate commercial activity or just possible social activity was a big plus. And very subtle things like the idea of a closed bedroom itself is something that maybe we take for granted, but it is so important, because while talking to children, we would hear stories of how they would be pretty traumatized and scandalized by what may happen in their bedrooms and so on. So this was all a lot to take in, and it was great learning in my opinion, and we really understood how to negotiate this in a certain sense. I'm just going to take a quick second. Sorry, I have to excuse myself for a second. I'm on low battery. And I'm back. Thank you for waiting. So we did a lot of other projects as well. Little Drops here. This is an old age home. This is a home for the destitute, people that have just been abandoned by their families. Some of them have medical bills that they can't pay. They've just been completely just left to fend for themselves. And so we saw some of these facilities, and these experiences really shook us to the core. And we came up with this again, a a modular idea that could be scaled up, which is a very, very simple one, which was to basically design these homes, these pa in Tamil shaped homes. And each one had a courtyard that would work quite differently. So one courtyard would be predominantly landscape, one would have a water body, one would actually have a setup for a lot of floor based games and so on. And as a result, what that would mean is when it's laid out in this large property, you would have a series of courtyards, all of which have something very, very different to offer. So from the perspective of somebody living here, this would be their world. This would be hopefully everything and more, that they could dream to be part of, and in an environment that was truly, truly special. And this was a conscious decision to make these watercolor representations, because we put all of this into a compilation in order to be able to raise funds for this project to happen. And I'm happy to say that it is happening. Similarly, schools was another typology that we became very, very interested to get into. And all of this, I think, and why I mentioned earlier that this talk, in a sense, is a little bit about our journey. It's also about how our priorities changed, our approach towards how we think about architecture changed, our approach towards how we think about, say, sustainability or the environment. All of these things changed, and how to really negotiate all that when we are doing work that's in the public domain. There are so many things to really balance, and for us, schools as a typology was always close to our heart, because we all know the value of schooling in that sense. And this is a beautiful primary school that's almost done in a place called Perumbakam, which is on Old Mahabalipuram Road in Chennai. And the idea of this entire school, it had a skew. So we basically staggered the entire school a little bit. And what that staggering and basically spacing up of some of these volumes allowed was for beautiful airflow through the day. And this is oriented, the shortest spans are oriented along the east and west. So there's very little heat gain as well. And both the corners are taken up by your cores and your toilets and so on. So the school itself is climatically fantastic. It's a great environment to be in. It's wonderful to, and I'm waiting for the day to actually see it active and not just be a site that we visit. These are some more visuals of that. I'm going to end here with what I believe has been our most successful public project. And again, I would like to reiterate as to how this is only possible through collaboration, because again, we would never, as a small studio of less than 10 people, we would never really even meet some of the criteria to be able to participate or contribute to some of these projects. But I think we all know that each of us have something special to bring onto the table. So in this case, we were working with the big guns like L&T and Trill, which is Tata Real Estate, to make this footOver bridge across OMR, which as it is called. It was an amazing experience to be part of that conversation and to have a seat on the table and to actually be taken seriously, and to have your opinions valued. Because over the last, say, 8 to 10 years, I think we understood a lot about the psyche of people in public spaces, in the public domain, and how essentially one can negotiate this, and basically how we can so for example, for instance, it was a no-brainer for everybody in this design process to suggest that this bridge needed to be covered. And we fought for close to 6 months to say that this bridge does not need to be covered, because at the end of the day, it is a place of transit. So if I was to get, say, wet or soaked in the sun between crossing from A to B, that would happen anyway, because between the point where the bridge stops to where they have to go, that was anyway going to happen. So A, it saved a lot of money. B, the openness of it is greatly attributed to how safe a lot of people feel on this particular bridge. So that and women's safety, especially when we when we started this exercise and we're doing research, I was talking to a few friends who work in IT parks along OMR, and I was really disturbed and scandalized almost by the casual way in which they would talk about what they would have to deal with in some of these badly designed footbridges that were covered with hoardings and were extremely unsafe, and there'd be a lot of antisocial activity happening, not just through the day but especially heightened in the evenings. And we were very, very eager to ensure that by design a lot of this was tackled in this particular project. So even when you look at the railings, you've got these this perforated railing that allows for maximum visibility, and it's kind of offset in such a way that you don't feel very constrained as far as the width of the footover bridge itself is concerned. We did a lot of traffic analysis and study to ensure that this could work. And the structure itself is a beautiful single pylon structure. This slide basically represents the scenario, and we learned a lot of things along the way, which is there's apparently a rule that all bridges should be perpendicular as far as the highways department is concerned to to a road. And so as you can see, this bridge is actually at an angle, and this also took a lot of negotiation. And at the end of the day, well, I think money also talks, because we were able to prove how making it at an angle was reducing X running meters off that bridge, and there itself they were having significant savings. And not just that, I think the way in which the road and the bridge respond to each other is something special. And what I'm told, and this is the beauty of, I think, all things urban and urban design in general, is you can have all your plans and chalked out, and you may have a vision for how you see the space being used, and no matter what, you will always be in for a surprise. I think there will always be a pleasant surprise. For instance, in the case of this bridge, the pleasant surprise was that early mornings, I'm not sure anymore given the scenario, but early mornings, a lot of people come to the MRTS park there, and essentially the bridge is used as their walking track. This came as news to me. This was a happy byproduct that I could have never imagined initially. And even smaller things like the structural members itself, we tried to design them in these catapult shaped, Y-shaped, slender columns, which would to some degree dissuade vandalism, even if it doesn't completely curb it. And this is what the detail of the bridge itself looks like. And I'm thrilled to say that the built structure is quite close to this. And with this, I think I will come to an end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed what you saw, and I'd like to open this up for questions. I hope this can be as informal as possible.
Thank you, Tahaer,
Thank you.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I think quite a few of the students have sent their questions in to architect Priyanka, who will now curate this session. And it's also open for all those who are present to raise some thoughts, interact. I can see quite a few present. Pramod is here with us, and Ramji, Sham, so several architects. And as I mentioned, architects from Nepal, Professor Rituraj Rai, Sri Lanka have also joined us. So I think we could have an interesting session of a conversation on the kind of projects and the interventions at various scales with different levels of complexities, both at the idea level and projects. I think we could open it up for a conversation, and they've sent it to Priyanka. I invite Priyanka to kind of curate this next session with you. Yeah, as Priyanka, would you?
Thank you, sir. And thank you, sir, and thank you, Tahaer, for the wonderful session, for opening our eyes out to the actual world of urban designing with a personal heritage, with the ecological facts, landscaping, pinpointing in particular a plant, especially the bougainvillea, which we see so often all around and taking that up as a topic, the multidisciplinary approach, the heritage management that you've gotten through, design and build that your firm Triple O is actually well symbolized with, opening our eyes to especially the pedestrian bridge access, which you mentioned a particular rule that it has to be perpendicular to the roads, which is quite a new fact for us, because we usually thought, okay, even if it is just across the road, it does not have to be a perpendicular fact, but that's quite an eye opener. And with that, I would take it to the questions that we have, of which the first one is, which project did you enjoy the most?
Um, Enjoy. Okay. I won't say enjoy, but I definitely would still like to think that the first project that I presented, which was the Nama Toilet project, I would call that a big break project. The big break is not so much in terms of how much, say, it's not for coming from a commercial standpoint, and neither is it coming from a standpoint of, oh wow, you've designed something absolutely beautiful and incredible. But I think it was a big break because it truly opened our eyes towards, the world of negotiating the public domain. It opened our eyes towards the way the government thinks. It opened our eyes towards the patience that one needs, because this entire process for that particular project took 2 years. So in a sense, we aged really fast over those 2 years as a result of this particular project. So from that perspective, it continues till this day to remain my favorite project.
That's nice, because the Nama toilet is more a public access thing. So, if I may ask, what were the factors you actually looked into while designing it?
So we
It
had
is a public
and
project
this is
that
where the
was
team
there.
really
So,
came in,
any
because
particular
yeah, so
personal
we had a
experience that
sanitation.
led you to design?
So we had a sanitation specialist with us who kind of spoke a lot about how and what can be done to the waste that is generally produced within these public toilets and these modules. That was a big eye opener. Then through the industrial designer, we learned quite a bit about some of these materials like FRP, fiber reinforced polymers, and how basically prototyping itself is done. And that itself was a very, very, so it gave us glimpses into other avenues of design that I feel there should be a lot more of happening in general. And for instance, that's one of the reasons I love what y'all are trying to do with these talks, which is about this idea of cross pollination, the idea of this dialogue going somewhere else, and the other way around. So for us, that was my biggest takeaway, which is like understanding the nuances of so many other avenues of design and thinking that all need to be in harmony with each other for a successful project. So that would be my biggest, say, learning if I were to generalize.
Okay. And you talked about the heritage walks that you had and the designs that you did at Mylapore. So, in the Mylapore heritage walks, are there specific learnings about urban design in terms of scale or proportions or the inferences that you accounted with?
I think um, this is probably applicable to a lot of cities that have had a colonial past. But what we saw in Mylapore ever since we started this project and started meandering through the narrow streets of Mylapore that we'd normally avoid if we were, not walking. Uh, Firstly, was amazing hybrid set of influences. Like you could tell that there were influences from the neoclassical to the art deco, and then there would be this hybrid layering of an agraharam styling within a neoclassical house. So we saw these beautiful like merging of ideas, because, and I'm assuming that for me that's the beauty of design, and that's why I continue to try and position myself as somebody who's a multidisciplinary designer, because maybe I have slightly better skills as an architect, only slightly, just to be clear. But I definitely think I am, I respond quite well to uh, other channels of design information also. And I found, for instance, I think, yeah, of course, Art Deco, we all have seen quite a bit about, but there are some hybrid. If those of you who are from Chennai and listening in, I strongly recommend a walk down Bazaar Road, which is in Mylapore, which is, you can only walk down Bazaar Road. You can't really take any vehicle down there, but you will see these phenomenal houses that belong to the Jain community. And among the other things that you learn when you do these exercises is you understand the community. I understood how cosmopolitan Mylapore is as a neighborhood, and uh, that was not the mental picture that I had until we started doing this exercise itself. Like one would always, Mylapore is marketed and packaged as that area that responds to the temple and the temple tank. And it is a very unfortunate, I would say, I mean, it's great for the temple and the tank, but there is much more to Mylapore than just meets the eye in that sense. So there are hybrid influences everywhere, not just in Mylapore. You'll see them in Georgetown, you'll see them in some parts of Chindadripet, you'll see them in many other areas, much like, and Calcutta has a similar beautiful set of hybrid influences in their architecture, especially in their architecture of the 20th century.
Okay, so if I can add to that, when we talk about heritage, when you're talking about Mylapore heritage walks, what do you do about the heritage conservation and management of Chennai historic buildings and structures? How did it get started?
So one thing we understood when we started to feel very sentimentally about heritage, as far as our context was concerned, is that most public buildings, say your Dare House or your say Higginbotham's, etc., buildings that are of a certain scale and in the public domain and mostly non-residential in nature, they get enough focus and they get enough emphasis and they are spoken about quite a bit. And there are a lot of examples. Of course, High Court is one of them as well. The Bharat Insurance building is very, very spoken about and a controversial subject at this point in time. But what I understood was that in the residential category, there is nothing happening. That's also because no one has really taken enough of an effort to educate people on the kind of gold that they are sitting on when they're sitting on some of these houses, the quality of the construction. I mean, the houses in Mylapore were like they were hardly damaged during the floods, during the cyclones that we've all seen in the over the last few years, and that speaks so volumes about the just the construction quality and how well they were built. And I feel like on one level that education needs to kind of happen amongst the people that are building, or people that are also living there. And another thing that unfortunately doesn't this is a misconception, and I think it can change, and that's a switch that we're looking to change, is the economics of heritage conservation. Because for a lot of people, they associate the idea of maintaining an old home that is built with certain construction techniques that don't have the skill set to be very serviceable or maintainable. The easy way out is to just redevelop and then get a little bit more area for yourself and so on. But I personally think that that's coming at a cost which is probably greater. But I think over time, engaging with a lot of these people in different communities, like today, if I go down to Mylapore, if I go down to a street like say Nadu Street, which is right in the center, we wave to a lot of people. It feels great to be a guest member of a lot of these communities. And I feel like as somebody who's been given a seat at the guest table, it feels really nice to also then engage with them in conversations about conservation. And so many personal stories come out. There's so much of personal history and personal stories that make for great learning. And for me, that's why I said every day at Madras Inherited is a new day. And we're slowly going as far and wide, at least within the city to start with. We've also done heritage walks in Pondicherry. We are going to be doing a few other walks in other places. And I will definitely, since I'm on record, I would tell everyone on this call and everyone listening in, we will be doing a heritage walk in Sidhpur, which is in a quaint little town in Gujarat. I'm sure many people on this call know about it, but definitely attend the walk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's a virtual walk, just to be clear. So all of us can be there.
That's right. And just to add on to the whole heritage thing, I am really curious about the Madras inherited body that you have created. So if you could please share in some more information about Madras inherited.
Sure. So like I said earlier, we started this as a project called Houses of Mylapore. We and after doing a couple of walks, we realized that no, this needs to be scaled up. We need to actually be thinking like this for the entire city, and that gave birth to Madras Inherited as an initiative. And besides heritage walks, we're working in the realm of heritage education. We're trying to work with kids to help, because to be honest, heritage is sometimes perceived to be a very boring subject, but we're realizing that there is so much potential to showcase it differently and be able to kind of educate people slightly differently about it, and to see the amazing things that we're actually sitting on. And I think what has worked well for us is the fact that I'm also an urban designer. I have found a way to kind of marry heritage with the city in its own way. And we're trying to do that in very unique ways. For instance, the signage project that I mentioned earlier, we're trying to get signage exclusively for different types of heritage in our city. And as a result, what that entails is so much of R&D. And I feel very grateful as a studio that we get to spend this kind of time doing R&D, because that's my only source of learning, to be honest. I don't really have the kind of, say, bandwidth to absorb much more than from the R&D that comes out from initiatives like Madras Inherited, like TripleOPixel, which is our photography initiative. I would say I have a photographic say eye, and I'm good with things like post production. I've always been very strong with digital tools, but uh, it's just very rewarding as an experience to build a community through Madras Inherited with people that have these houses and live in these neighborhoods, and then through Pixel by actually talking to other peers, colleagues, some of whom we've actually shot for are actually on the call as well today. And it's just it's lovely. So all in all, that ecosystem and this idea of cross pollination between one initiative learning from the other is constantly happening in our studio.
Thank you for the clear initiative that you've taken and giving us a wider perspective on how to look at heritage and how to combine it with a personal touch that is there. And urbanic planning or urban planning is something that we always think about is only about the roads or only about the city planning, but this has gotten a lot more personal perspectives as to how we experience these spaces and how we can re-experience them through the initiatives that you have actually taken through. So thanks. Over to sir. So Durganand sir.
Thank you, Priyanka, for that curation and the questions you raised that inspired Tahaer to get deeper into some of his projects. I would really like to invite, we have senior architects here with us. If any one of them, there's Pramod here, always a pleasure to hear Pramod. There's architect Sivakumar, quite a few here with us. So if some of them would like to raise some issues which could be generic, specific, I think it would be wonderful.
Can I come in?
Sure, Pramod. Look forward.
Yeah. Tahaer,
Hi,
begin
Pramod.
with, hi. To begin with, I'd like to just crack little joke. You shouldn't be a TripleOStudio. You should be a 007 studio. All right. The kind of work that you've done across so much that you've done is heartening, because the fact that not many studios do this kind of work, right? And put in so much effort into these small things that are very, very important. And listening to you today, I have learned a lot. And I think many of the young that are listening to you should understand that architecture need not necessarily be nestled in wanting to build only, but it can express itself in many different ways like you have done, and how important it is to collaborate, and not collaborate with only architects, but all other kinds of what is not creative, but everybody else. And your collaboration with state gives me great this thing that, wow, you managed to cross over, right? That's the most difficult thing to do. And across the realm of work that you've done, the scale of work that you've done, kudos, bye, kudos. I'm going to come and join you for some of that collaboration soon. Thank you.
Pramod, you made my day. For the others listening in, Pramod was also my faculty when I was studying architecture. And if I can be candid, I used to be just to go on record, terrified of Pramod. And I remember he looked at my IT park. And I was obsessed with working with Rotary even when you were allowed to go digital. So that was my bad, and I had only 2 sheets. And I think somebody like Pramod valued the fact that I had attempted to try this manually, and he looked at it, glanced over it for a second, and he's like, "Yeah, this can work." And I came out feeling like I have, achieved something phenomenal. But thank you, Pramod. You've always been really, really supportive of us, and you've really made my day. I'm going to definitely have a drink on you today.
I'll have one with you too. Cheers.
Thank you so much. It really means a lot.
Thank you, Pramod.
Cheers.
That was a thank you, Pramod.
Pleasure.
Would anyone else like to respond? Because I think that was a very insightful sharing. I don't think I'll call it a presentation. It was of challenges, of scales, of kind of reflecting on what a practice can be. So I think for students all present here, it kind of, and that's also one of the objectives of this smaller talk series, is that we start opening this up, and then it builds up some kind of an archive, it builds into something else. And I think that is growing well. And thank you, Tahaer, for that presentation. Maybe if there's someone, if Shyam or Saveetha, thank you, sir. If Shyam or
Tahaer, yeah.
Yes.
Can I comment
yes,
now?
Shyam. Yes, please.
Tahaer, it was a lovely presentation. I think it's wonderful that a studio like yours is looking at all dimensions, in the sense you're looking at international competitions, you're looking at small interventions like heritage walks, doing photography of many architects' works, as well as these heritage houses that you have taken photographs about, and a pedestrian pathway everywhere. I think truly you're doing what an architect is supposed to do, and you are trying to improve every aspect of the city as well as the projects that you are doing. It's really wonderful, Tahaer. Congratulations
so
for that.
It really means so much coming from all of you. I am extremely humbled, and I'm lost for words, to be honest. I'm very, very humbled. Just thank you all.
Yeah, I just have an observation and a discussion that could probably be. I started off talking to a professor from Nepal. What is happening to his city? His tradition is being lost, and he immediately said it's becoming a concrete jungle. And you have also set in, as a city of Madras, we were Kapalishwara temple city, we have a Triplicane Perumal temple city, and our entire heritage, not just temples, we have beautiful churches, we have so much of heritage here, but everything is getting lost. The identity itself for the city or for the people of the city is totally getting lost. What kind of interventions other than these walks and how to stop these people demolishing their beautiful houses? Is there any future at all for cities like us, or you see that there is nothing that can be done?
Is that for me, or is that for Rutraj, Sham?
For you, then maybe you can go to Rutraj.
Okay. So I would like to be slightly optimistic and say that something can be done. I think we have a poor track record of uh, archiving. We have a poor track record of maintaining our heritage in a good manner, in a manner that's sustainable. But I do see that at least over the short duration that we've been doing this, and I've kind of zoomed into this a little bit more myself, that I'm there is that interest. There are a lot of people that essentially don't know where to go when they want to do something with their house. So it's not and they know that it's not always an architect who has the answer. Sometimes their requirements are hybrid in a sense. It's a borderlining maintaining the house rather than actually working on some civil construction in its typical sense. So the more and more that I have been talking to them, what we are also doing in parallel is building a network of different people that can help maintain such houses, who have knowledge on certain traditional techniques or such older techniques that aren't really in vogue or kind of used currently, such as the Madras terrace roof, for instance, lime mortar, for instance, etc. So we're building this network, and so now we've become a weird call center of sorts. Like, people call us and want to be connected to somebody who can do XYZ for them. So currently that's where it is, but I would love to see a future where we get to play a very, very active role in being directly responsible, or to be able to rejuvenate an older building. And I agree that it's fast disappearing, and like I said earlier, I continue to maintain that I do think bigger public famous buildings, something will happen to them. We may agree or disagree with what's happening to them, but something will happen to them. They may continue to exist in some form, but as far as houses are concerned, unless we prove to people that the metrics or the numbers don't have to aren't really as skewed as they may think, I think then there is a little bit of hope. And the more I'm talking to people from different communities, a lot of them are, quite interested in actually keeping their houses, but it's just that they didn't know where to go before. So I'm really happy on that front, that we've become this go-to agency of some kind. And I'm hoping that will become something more meaningful for us as well moving forward.
That is quite optimistic. Thank you for sharing that. Is Ritu joining for this?
Yeah, hello. Yes. Okay. Yes, that was a very, I think that concerns everyone. These where old heritage is being gradually replaced, or we are having to deal with modern forces. Yeah, thank you very much, by the way, yeah, Tahaer, for a wonderful presentation. So
Thank you.
I mean, I I don't really know how. I think, I mean, conservation and I was with another group today, and they were talking about a slightly unheard of town. Everyone talks about the heritage cities, like there are 7 World Heritage sites within Kathmandu Valley, the familiar ones, but they were talking about an old town in West Nepal called Tansen. So and then one lady was from there, and then how everything is there has also undergone drastic change. So I don't know really what we can do, because everyone needs to. They were even talking about Barpak, and which is the earthquake hit place, and how interventions and people were trying to rebuild. Then some professor called Karl Prussia came, and who worked in the 70s, the early 70s, made some modern buildings, and now they're all decrepit. And they went to a town in Helambu, an old, basically it's along the foothills of the Himalayas. So how the entire village, I think, was more or less wiped out, but everyone had gone abroad, to seek their living. So virtually nobody was there when the earthquake hit. And I mean, I think there are several factors. All, people are migrating, and I mean, everything comes into play, right? So I don't know. I mean, in Old Patan, we see some boutique hotels, some effort. Of course, I think it's to the credit of these old cities that they are still very vibrant, and they still attract a lot of activity. There have been conservation efforts. There's been German people. I don't know, KB Jane's friends, Hagmuller and Niels Gucho, which I don't know them personally, but I mean, since Durganand is here, KB Jain, and I think Vasavada, Professor Vasavada used to know these people. So they've been very active in these old towns of this old town of Bhaktapur, and they've preserved it very well. It's I would say probably that's the one of the old towns which is very well preserved, of Kathmandu Valley. And it was so when you showed your school slide, coming back to Tahaer's presentation, we and you showed these long these big facades, but then you had these narrow slit windows, so that was a very climatically appropriate response, whereas we would do the same but keep large windows, so that was I just felt that struck me as just the opposite response. Over there in the heat, you block out the uh, you control the amount of light and heat coming in, but here we will, I mean, here it's 6 months of the year it's really cold. So yeah, so that is one. And then I had a question. In the Manila project, you said you invited architects who are not familiar with the context. So what was the idea behind that?
So this was the project in Manila. It was called DATE, which is basically design against the elements. That was the competition that was floated by the mayor. And so what I meant when I said I'd invited at that point, and I continue to teach. I've been I truly believe in the philosophy that you teach best what you want to learn the most. So I've been teaching for a little over 8 years now, and every time I would go to class, I would basically just be it would be an open invite to anybody who would want to come to our studio. And luckily, where I used to teach back then and where our studio is located was really close by. So it continues till today, but for a long time there would be people I've not seen, in my class, but they would be in the studio. And that built a very nice culture during the early years, especially where there would be a lot of just conversation, ideation, tossing things back and forth. And so this particular that's what I had basically meant when I said I'd invited quite a few people. And I continue to do that till this day. Very recently we participated in a railway station design competition in Lithuania, where I'd completely worked with students from a studio that I was mentoring, and it was a phenomenal experience. I feel like all of us kind of bring very, very different things onto the table that we sometimes assume that cannot be made to work perfectly. But it is a challenge, no doubt, but I have seen this work quite well, and I'm always working with students. I love the kind of energy that students have, and it's always a rewarding experience in my opinion. And I think I have people like Pramod, Sham to thank for because I now understand how they have done things for so long, and Durganand, you as well, of course.
Thank you very much. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Back saying that.
Can I just come in for a minute?
Sure, sure.
Two red lines saying it's
Okay,
weather.
Tahaer, if you look at Mylapore
Yeah.
and you look at
Yeah.
Triplicane, you would see that Triplicane things still remain to a large extent. Would I be wrong or right?
No, you're right. You're right.
Right. So, and then I did an extensive study in Tirupuru, okay, which is a town
Okay.
outside on the OMR, right?
Yeah.
Which
Hmm.
is now dying, completely dying. It's withering away.
Hmm.
So when you
Hmm.
look at these three
Hmm.
places, I think Triplicane
Hmm.
survived because the city didn't go through it, while Tirupuru
Yes.
died because
True.
the OMR just went right through it. And Mylapore became what it is
Yeah.
because of the RK Mart Road and the Santom High Road all becoming very prominent kind of things that completely changed the forces, the economic forces on the place. It didn't happen in the Parthasarathy temple area. You still find people
Yeah.
living there, houses are maintained there. It's still, the character still remains there. So I think it's
True.
got to do with what the city did with it without being sensitive to it. The OMR is the most
Yeah.
insensitive way of building a road, I think.
Yeah.
It
No, I
kills
agree. Not
everything
only did
along
it,
its track.
yeah.
Yeah.
True. True.
I just want to
Spot
say
on. I
that,
think
you know.
it's
Yeah.
no, absolutely. You're spot on there, Pramod. I agree completely.
Sure.
OMR
Yeah.
has done just that.
In the
And
TCR is
Yes.
doing
actually,
it too.
although on that note, though, I'm quite interested to see what happens, especially now that so many of us are working from home and working remotely. And I'm actually very curious to see what becomes of OMR, especially if I were to just, if I can speak technically here, if I was to look at the cross section and the interface between those buildings and what is the pseudo service lane and then the actual highway and so on. I actually see quite a lot of potential there now. I've been quite excited in OMR, about OMR rather, since this has happened. And I'm not saying we can undo what's done, and I'm not saying that damage is. I think the damage is already done, but I definitely think there is, well, a glimmer of hope as far as maybe vibrancy on the street is concerned. I think so. Let's see what we can do there together, maybe, Pramod.
The metro is coming up over it. Don't worry. Right through.
Yeah, yeah. That's going to be a long, painful few years, I'm sure.
Yes. And it'll change. It will change the scale of the whole thing. Just change it. It'll disconnect further.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tahaer. Thanks, Nandan. Thanks, SCAD.
I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you again, Tahaer, for that presentation. And we hope to invite all of them who are here to our campus as soon as the lockdown and all these things are behind us, because maybe review the students' works for the last 2 years. I know our school is only 2 years old, but even through the lockdown, the students who are present, many of whom are present here, on their own also insisted to come to the campus. So we were pretty much running on campus, because even the first year, and with absolutely no case of any of these of the pandemic. No one caught the pandemic. So we had our social distancing norms, and they were working with craftsmen. They were working on various building construction methods on site for the last few months. So we kept it on, though on a much slower pace, and we're just getting some feel of the of how this blended online, some feel, I won't say a complete feel, and the outcome we need to see, and of which we thought then opening, this was really supposed to be a talk series within the classroom, but then we thought we could just keep it open. So, Pramod is here, Sham is here, Ramji comes in. There are quite a few coming. Ritu has come in from Nepal today. The other day we had faculty from Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. So it's been an interesting set of talks, it's more for our own internal purposes, but which are available for anyone open source. So thank you, Tahaer. And before we close, I would like to also share that we have on Tuesday a talk with the legendary Eric Owen Moss, who rarely agrees for a lecture or any conversation. And so it's all the more, we look forward to that talk on Tuesday evening at 7:30. And Eric is getting up at 6 in the morning to give us the talk at 7:30. So he's put in a lot of effort. So I hope all can be there, because it is going to be a rare talk. And so I look forward to it. And thank you again, Tahaer. Let's be in touch and look forward to
Thank
inviting you to
we
our
will, and I
studios.
look forward
Yeah.
to. Thank you so
Sure.
much. Thank you, everyone.
you.
It was a
Thank
lovely
you. Yeah.
session.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.